So today for the presenters, we have Leanna Clugston and Eva DeGostiny. Yay!
Thank you, Cheryl. It's so lovely to be here. This is a project that flows from our 4 to 8-year-old project. And I'm so pleased today to have with me and the person who will be our main presenter, Lena Clugston, who has worked for many, many years with the very youngest, the ones that you are working with. And so together we will share the knowledge that we have and hope, along with Cheryl and with Sarah and with all of you, that this will then be able to integrate into the way in which you wish to raise your children in your communities and in a way that is the best for you. So I will pass it on to Lena.
Hello, everyone. I'm so honored to be here with you today. I'm going to begin sharing the screen because we're going to be able to look at some of the actors in my development and learning about how to take care of young children in the Neufeld paradigm. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Bear with me just for a moment. There we go. So hello again. I would like to thank Valerie, Eva, and I'm skipping through to where we are currently. Valerie and Eva and Cheryl for including me in this project. Eva brings vast experience, as Valerie has already noted, with brain development in young children. Cheryl is a wonderful link and also a practicing professional in the field. And today we're going to be looking at two different sections of the work. First is building a village of attachment. And the next part is to look at the preschooler personality. And I just want to point that out. We will have a break for about 15 minutes. And as Cheryl mentioned, you are free to put questions and comments into the chat. They will be read. And if we can't get to answering all of them, they'll be put into our consideration for other sessions and for a question and answer session that we will have in January. So why am I doing this? I want to introduce myself to you. I am really firmly committed to being better at what I do with a firm foundation under me. And this is where Dr. Neufeld has been of enormous value to me. We're going to have 8 sessions to look over things. And there he is, Dr. Neufeld, who is a developmental psychologist and works with attachment theory. So as I mentioned, we'll first work on attachment and what this means. And I thought as part of you getting to know me, I should tell you how I fell into this. It was almost by accident that I found the work of Dr. Neufeld. It fit for me because I was on a quest that began when my daughter Claire was born. And I remember so distinctly looking into her eyes as I was putting her into her crib, when she was about, I don't know, maybe 6 months old or so, and thinking, what I say and how I am with her completely influences who she will become. And that became my guide for finding teachers who could help me improve, get better with my communication, with my responses, my knowledge. However, when Dr. Neufeld and I met, and Eva and I met in 2013, I realized I had actually found a way to integrate all of these different elements, all of these different practices that I had learned about and developed over the years into something that made much more sense, because we were starting to look at brain development in the young child. And this, I actually laughed out loud. I remember watching a course of his and just thinking, well, this makes it all make sense. And it was because we were looking at the brain. So this is going to be part of what we do. It's not intimidating in any way. It's made very clear and very easy to follow, but it makes sense of so much of what we see in a young child. One of the things that Dr. Neufeld is absolutely master of is bringing little phrases to our attention. Now, the name of his book is Hold On to Your Kids, How Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. But he uses the phrase hold on frequently as when he's teaching and giving us teachings that we can use in our work. So I plan in these 8 sessions to kind of pull out some key phrases that I think may be of use to you. They were certainly of use to me. The first one being from Dr. Neufeld: how we see influences what we do. And he often uses the word lens, so that we can look through a different lens. And that is indeed what happened for me. I started to look at children differently as a result of beginning to learn with Dr. Neufeld. My hope is through these sessions that you gain a new understanding, that the teachings will help preserve your soft, warm hearts in a field that is very challenging, and that you will be strengthened in your practices in this work. So here I am in a classroom at Bowdoin College Children's Center, after raising my children and studying wherever I could and doing the best I could with raising them. I obtained a position at Bowdoin to work on bringing the Neufeld paradigm into the childcare that they provide for their faculty and staff. So I did that for 8 years, and I had so much fun. Because that is another aspect of working in this paradigm. There is a lot of focus on play. So I love this material. And the story that I wanted to tell you about my first experience of finding one of these phrases that Dr. Neufeld had given me, gives us, happened my first year in the infant room at Bowdoin with a new group of children. And there was a child who had been idyllically raised all summer long on the deck of his home with his father, who was a teacher and was home for the summer. So this little boy was brought to the center, and although I had made some connection with the family prior to his arrival, he was quite distressed when his family left, I think it was his father, in fact, that dropped him off. And for 3 days, I held him. For 3 days, he cried. I didn't really completely understand what I was doing at this point, but I held on to a phrase which Dr. Neufeld gives us: never let a child feel they are too much for you. And I thought, no matter what, I cannot pass him around. I cannot put him down. I need to stay close to him so that eventually he will feel safe with me. Now, we have the luxury at Bowdoin of having a team in the infant room So it wasn't just me alone with children. This may not always be true for people. But in this instance, it was true. And oh my gosh, my teammates who hadn't been schooled in the Neufeld paradigm at all, and I was really brand new to the center, just glared at me for 3 days. But I stuck to it. And at the end of 3 days, he looked at me and he started to make a little tone. He sang like a little da. He just made this little noise. And I made a noise back. I went da. And eventually he and I we had a little chorus of infants because he loved to sing. I loved to sing. And we would sing together. He would tone, I would tone. There were no words involved in this, no tunes. It was just back and forth, a little dance. And this is, if I had not had that phrase, never let a child feel that they are too much for you to hold on to, I never would have done what I did. And I never would have gotten him to a place where he felt safe and at rest in my care. I get pretty emotional talking about these things, so I'm sorry if you suddenly see me break down in tears, don't be surprised. So we're going to start with attachment and that was our overarching paradigm, if you will, our overarching theory, teaching, however you like to call it, attachment. And this will see us through all 8 sessions. And we'll begin to gain confidence and to be proud and to be able to stand on a very firm foundation of research and theory and practice that has been here with us for many years. It is also, I believe, and I think Eva, you would agree with me, it is a natural wisdom. It is how things are meant to be. So there will always be connection to things you already know. We're just putting them maybe in a different framework and deepening it a little bit into neuroscience. There is no question that our job is daunting. Children are not like us, and we are not like them. And as we begin working with young children, as I began, I had to learn a whole new way of being and a whole new vocabulary. I have mentioned that Dr. Neufeld helped me integrate practices that I had previously studied through Pickler Institute and several other places. But once I understood that children are not like us because of their brain development, what I was seeing was normal, that untemperedness, inconsideration, and problems with separation were the story of a preschooler. And by preschooler, by the way, I mean birth to 7, really. That this is normal based on what we will learn about how the brain unfolds. I became very comfortable. I became very different in my practice. And we'll unfold more of this preschooler personality profile in the second part of today's presentation, and then in way more depth in session 2. Another key phrase that I love of Dr. Neufeld's, which has been a great comfort to me, is that nature has a plan. And we know this. Just look at the seasons. We know this. We know that there are forces outside and that nature does its work without our interference. And like the seasons, this picture of development is also profoundly linked to the natural world and the natural cycles of things. Children have seasons of maturation. Human beings have different seasons in their lives. We know this, and we can trust this unfolding nature of human existence. So interestingly, I have been waiting for a long time to be here together with you. And fall, as it turns out, I've learned, is the season of waiting. Even as the seasons turn from fall into winter, things are getting darker. And then in winter, there's a return to light. So all 4 seasons are represented in this image. And also, I think we will be journeying through all 4 seasons in our 8 sessions together. Even though it probably doesn't look like this where you live, and I live in Maine, doesn't look like this for me either, but it is still autumn. We're still in our period of waiting for the light to return. Things are getting darker. And I wanted to just share with you some thoughts about autumn and then link it to what we're talking about today. This is from Parker Palmer. He wrote a book called Courage to Teach, by the way, which is one of my favorite books. The days grow shorter. Faced with inevitable winter, what does nature do in autumn? She scatters the seeds that will bring new growth in the spring, and she scatters them with amazing abandon. She scatters them with amazing abandon. Well, we are starting to seed ourselves in this work. And we are also in our work with young children, seeding them for their future maturation. And one thing, I've been looking at seeds quite a lot. And there've been, I don't know, here and there, photos of seeds have been front and center, probably because of the season. And they are so complex and they are so different and they have different requirements for growth. They have different rates of growth. They need different conditions, just like the children in our care. There's a process for development. The piece that's missing in this particular image is the cocoon. The caterpillar spins a cocoon and then becomes a butterfly. But we know that this process cannot be hurried. In fact, if you interrupt and help the butterfly emerge from the cocoon, they will very often be injured and not survive. That's a bit of an extreme example. But one of the ways that we can trust in nature's plan is also to give space and time for development to happen. The young child will mature. They will be different. They will get where we want them if they're given time and space for that metamorphosis to happen. There is a yearning in nature to emerge. I spend a lot of summers in Newfoundland where there are trees that are called tuckamores, and they are the junipers that are native to that area, but they've been so buffeted by winds that they become just, their shape is just beautiful, but you can see it is not upright. It is completely different. We are all shaped by our environment. Tuckamores play a valuable role for wildlife and so on, even though they don't look like junipers that we might see in less harsh climates. We are creating, Dr. Neufeld tells us, a womb for children, or a cocoon, if you prefer, for children to mature within. This is the role of an attached relationship with a child. It's an enveloping, shielding energy between an adult and a child that makes them feel safe. And in fact, this is a natural thing for adults to do with children. We are drawn to taking care of children. And we can trust in nature's plan. We can trust in nature's plan that within that cocoon or womb of attachment, of warm relationships with adults, the child will reach maturation beautifully. So the question, what is attachment? There's so many different ways to look at this. I chose these images because I think it kind of captures a bit of the universality and the fact that attachment is in our very cellular structure. The picture on the left is an atom. And you can see how the big red nucleus has all these electrons circulating around it. I also find this image useful in thinking about how a classroom runs or how a family runs, that there is an adult, a caring adult around whom the children circle. They turn to the adult for their orientation, for their feeling of safety. And so this is actually how our cells in our body are constructed, and all matter for that matter. So we see that this attachment idea is in the core of our being. And it's also in the core of our universe. The second picture on the right is the solar system. Again, planets circling around the sun. So children will naturally orient to a responsible adult. And this is why, to manage our classrooms, it is important that we understand that that is the role, the proper role for us to assume for the easiest unfolding of maturation and classroom management and love, and for the child to feel safe and at rest in our care. You can imagine being a young child. You've just come into the world and you really don't know what anything is, where it is, how you should be. It's all a time for absorbing, but keeping close to the person who is leading you into your experience of the world, so that your brain has time to build some experiences and context to understand where they have landed. So Dr. Neufeld tells us again, the more you find your leader role, the more likely the children will go into orbit around you, and you become the center of the classroom. I like to do a minute of practical tips at this moment. And that is something that, again, I learned at Bowdoin. When the parents would drop off their children, well, I learned this in other places too, come to think of it. When parents would drop off their children, they would often, in my experience, say, oh, look, Matilda's here. Oh, look, Roni's here. These were peers, orienting the children to what children were there. So I, at some point, actually gave them a little tip. I said, you know, when you drop off and pick up your child, please orient them to me and tell them, oh, Lena's here. She's going to take care of you today, rather than their peers who are unlikely candidates for responsible care. But just that little shift, and the parents got it and eagerly accepted that. So they would talk about Lena at home, or whoever the caregiver happened to be. They would talk, you know, I became the center. And this was supported by the parents. And this gave the children a certain amount of confidence in me too. Oh, my parents are talking about it, blah, 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 blah. So that was great. So it wasn't just about the peers. The peers are very important, but they're somewhat unreliable. So being there and being solid is 90% of the work in the classroom. Here's another definition, 3 definitions really, of attachment from Dr. Neufeld. Attachment is a word for the science of relationship. And we've talked about how it's science, how it's happening at the atomic level and the cosmic level, but also there's research done into the power of relationships through the heart, from human being to human being, and for animals as well, which you're probably quite aware of. It gets a little bit more nuanced here with the second sentence. Attachment is a term for the human predisposition for togetherness. Predisposition. We are inclined to be with each other. That is what we long for. There's a story often told about how if there is some kind of natural disaster, we don't ask, oh, where's my hot dish supper? We ask, where's my child? Where's my mother? Where's my partner? We look for each other. That is what matters. It is a huge instinct in us. And it does make sense when you think of it, because this is necessary for survival, that we are predisposed to togetherness, adults and children, adults to adults. This is how we manage in the world. And finally, it's that drive or relationship characterized, so we can recognize it, by the pursuit and preservation of our proximity. So for us to feel safe, especially as young children, we need to be in contact, physical proximity, physical contact with the adult who is taking care of us. So these are kind of some images for you to take with you to think about this attachment drive, which is instinctual and hugely powerful in all human beings, whatever their age. We want what we're talking about today, and will continue over the next months, is how we can surround the child with that cocoon, that womb of attachment for them to feel safe. We call this rooting, which I kind of love, because again, we're back to the natural world and putting down roots. These are the roots of the human being in their relationships to other people. So how do we develop this in a classroom setting? And I also begin with a morning greeting that is filled with warmth, where I am greeting the parent, and my eyes will kind of slide over the child, especially when they don't know me very well, because they're going to learn this greeting. They're going to learn that this is a safe person to attach to by how the parents and I are communicating. I can remember telling parents in my parent-child classes, don't worry if your child doesn't greet me in the morning. I will greet you, and they will learn how to greet through that. And I was amazed at how quickly everybody knew that this was true, because their children were always hiding behind them when they came in the door, and children are shy. And so to be asked to greet somebody that they don't know feels wrong to them, because they want to only be with people that they do know, because that's safe. But eventually, once established relationship between the parent and child has happened and they've witnessed it, then the greeting to the child becomes much simpler. And of course, in a childcare situation, we greet the child as best we can with when the parent is dropping off and when they are a little bit more comfortable and not reluctant. We have to be careful about moving in too fast and too slow, and more about that later. But we really want to surround the child with our warmth and make it easy for them to attach to us. So what is an attached relationship? I'm doing the morning verse in this particular photo. And the little boy is looking at me, and I am providing him with something that he absolutely loves, a little song, a little movement, and he is just gripped on the left. There I am providing. My hands are out. I've given him something. And then look what happens. He is imitating me. He's going to do what I'm doing. This is exactly what we want. He's now made me the focus of his world. At this moment, it won't always be this way, but at this moment, I am the focus. I am the center of his universe. He is going to do what I'm doing. That means that he, excuse me, will also do what I ask at other times during the day, if that is properly cultivated. I am close to him, so there's some proximity there. I am worthy of imitation because what I am doing is appealing to him, and he has a total sense of his significance and belonging because we're doing this together. These are all stages of attachment in the first 4 years of life. The child is receptive and willing to be cared for. This is not always the case. Some children have resistance to being cared for, but we'll talk about that quite a bit more today. So I am providing orientation for him, and he, I knew him for 3 years. I took care of him, and I always provided orientation for him. He was always soft-hearted and willing to be in my care. So when you have an attached child, when you've worked to build that warm cocoon so it's a trusting relationship, then they feel safe in our care. And by safe, I mean they know who's taking care of them. And it takes our time and attention for them to feel that they can count on us, especially in a childcare situation. It just takes some time. But once you're there, everything becomes much easier for the child and for us. Time and attention. That equals love to the young child, probably to all of us. And there is the man who gave us the word attachment, coined it is the word I'm looking for, described his attachment theory, Dr. Bowlby, to his wife, and his wife looked at him and said, that's love. Interesting. When a child feels safe and that they know who is taking care of them, they will venture forth and play. Play is actually one of the goals for our work with young children. It's the work, it has been called the work of early childhood, but play is the inner world, like a dream world, being expressed. It is healing. It is, although it may be the work of childhood, it is not work. It is play. It has no particular outcomes. It's just in the moment. And Dr. Neufeld calls it the greenhouse for maturation. So this is different than playing with This is different than being playful. We're going to touch on all of those things in our session on play. But we're shielding play, this kind of inner expression, where they are so completely focused on what they're doing. And you can see in this photo, the same little lad is intent on learning how to put on a boot. The best toys in my room were boots and mittens and hats, along with purses, something to carry things in. But we gathered together all sorts of boots that were floating around, that had been abandoned. And oh my goodness, that was the focus of so much. And you can see the little fellow on the right is also, he's imitating too, and he's going to try to get his boot on. So as they struggle with this task, they are etching some pathways in their brain. They're learning how to do it. They're learning several ways of doing it, because the boot falls over. They can do it standing up, but sometimes they have to be sitting down. They work on it. We would call it work, but honestly, although they have a bit of an outcome in mind, the process of getting there is completely just them focused on the task of getting that boot on, which for them is play. I love this idea. Taking pleasure in being together. When we know what's happening with each child, and we can build this attached relationship, which you see so lovingly here, then they follow our lead. They turn to us for help. They turn to us for comfort. They show us who they are. And we are reaching to their level. And see, Sarah here is at his level. There's eye contact. They are communicating with one another. It is harder for us in some ways to go to this level, to go to the level of understanding where the child is in their presence, then sometimes it is to just expect them to do what we as adults know is appropriate. I found, however, that the most renewing part of my work was exactly what's being captured in this image, in this photo. I love being with 2- and 3-year-olds. They're at, and just being with how they think, where their attention is, what their interests are, and so on. And then when they have that, when they know that that's there, they will follow you. They will follow you, and it makes everything much more pleasurable. So we are creating a relationship with a child rather than reacting to what the child does. We are committed to relationship. So Dr. Neufeld has developed a schema of the stages of attachment. I'm just going to go through birth to 4 with you. There are others, and we will cover them in a subsequent session. So the main thing to understand here is that proximity, that idea of togetherness, is a survival instinct. As newborns and young children, we cannot survive without an adult taking care of us. So nature has a plan. Nature gives us the instinct to seek proximity. And you see it with a newborn. Of course, they're very alarmed and upset when they're not being held sometimes. Or you see it with children who are being left with people they don't know. You see it all over the place, that being together with somebody that you know is really core to our well-being. So as we get older, as the child gets older, rather, they develop other ways to continue to feel safe and feel that thread of, or that cord of attachment, even when apart. So in the beginning, it's all about proximity. It can also include singing and sounds. Proximity can be smell. It can be some of the senses. If you're in sight, sometimes that's enough proximity, and so on. As the child gets older, their repertoire of things they can count on to feel attached increases. So the infant's urge for closeness and attachment is so strong that if the carer doesn't stay close to that child, they will do things to draw the carer to them. And we know children who cry and cling and need to be by us. So if we just accept this as part of their attachment need for proximity, we can plan for it. We can get ahead of it. We can figure out how we're going to orchestrate the day to keep a child close to us. I would wear an apron often in the classroom, and with the older children who needed to be close, I would say, here, hold on to my apron. And they would just hold on to my apron, and I'd go about my business. Or I could say, I could sit as Betsy's doing in this photo, and she's knitting. And there's the child very close to her. She's knitting and also imitating her. I had a child in my care who I noticed when he was a young toddler, he was always calling my name. Lena, Lena, every minute or so, he was calling me, and I thought about it and I thought, oh, he's searching. He wants to know where I am. He orients around me. He wants to know where I am. I've got to get ahead of him, so I'm not always answering him. So I started saying his name, and I'd say, Gabriel, and I would say it before he said my name, and I kept him in my sight. And after 3 days, it was over. He was not asking anymore where I was all the time. He knew that I was looking out for him, even if I wasn't close by him. The second year of life, well, between 1 and 2, we've moved to sameness and imitation, a capacity for noticing what's the same about me and Lena, what's different about me and Lena. So the second stage of attachment is looking for sameness and a willingness to imitate. I can remember the point of connection with a little girl I was caring for last year. She would notice, oh, we're both wearing blue. She had a little turquoise necklace, so I got out my turquoise necklace, and yes, of course, she noticed it, and she learned the word turquoise, which was nice. But she connected with me through that necklace, the colors. It became almost everything, what hat I was wearing, and so on and so forth. They will also imitate us, and with cleaning tasks or cooking tasks or whatever, they want to be doing what we are doing. We had a great laundry folding. I had a wonderful laundry folding experience. Every morning we'd get the laundry out of the dryer, and there would be our napkins and our cloths and whatever else we had in the classroom that needed washing. And I came up with a little song about sorting and folding laundry. And at first, the things in the basket were spread all over the room. They were playing with them, and I kept folding and da-da-da. And eventually I would say, oh, I see something over there. It all came back. That was the young toddler year. It all came back, and then they were given piles to put in certain places, and they loved this. And then in the older toddler classroom, they wanted a few of them. The older ones wanted to learn how to fold, and we were folding bibs, and there was some complexity to this, but they got to the point where they learned how to fold, and then they were bored with the whole thing, and that was that.
I just want to add one little more thing in here too, Lena, is
Yes.
that sameness is where language and the desire to learn the language of your people comes from.
Yes.
And that's why also, again, it is so important when we're looking at language development that children are attached to us, because this is the moment at which they are now going to start to make the sounds that the adults around them make. And it's quite a beautiful process. And I know that in many of the communities now, the adults are wanting to teach the children their own language. And it's such a beautiful way for it to happen.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Eva. Yes. And in fact, and knowing that, we had a Chinese speaker, Danish speaker, German speaker, and French speakers in my class. And I would ask those parents to actually make those sounds so that the children could hear them. And because that's when there's a window in the brain, I think you would agree, Eva, is that not true? Where when you hear sounds that aren't normal in your language, you can absorb them and use them later. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Although there's probably more of a window than we think, but it's lovely when it happens in those early days.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So here, the next stage, which happens between 2 and 3, is this sense of belonging and importance. And the children were so aware of who wasn't there, adult or child. They had a developing group sense, and circle time went from something that was just invitational, where I would do the circle and people either came or not, or sing some songs, and I kept it very simple, to actually some place where they liked to come, form a circle, and be together. One day, there was an upset mood in the room, and I was looking around the circle because we started our day fairly early with that, and I noticed that they were looking at the spot where my assistant Sarah normally sat. I shifted and I started singing a song, Sarah's Not Here, Sarah's Not Here. And they started to laugh and they got it. And because it was a fun song, sung to a different tune. And from that point on, every morning we sang, if someone was missing, we sang that song with different word, different person put into it. But building that sense of who do I belong to? Who is part of my group? Peers, adults, everybody all together. And they knew so well at the snack and lunch table who was there and who was not, and where that person was if they weren't there. So one of the other teachings that Dr. Neufeld brings to us is about how important it is for a child to have multiple adults that feel safe to them, with whom they have a relationship, a trusting relationship. And of course, it can be parents, it can be grandparents, it can be the whole community. And Cheryl, I wonder if you would like to talk a little bit about how this works in community.
Hi, Lena. Well, just thinking about it, like the first thing is, you see in this picture, like there's a lot of people there, but parents are the first thing, parents or caregivers, because like nature's plan, you kind of are attracted to other parents. And because of maybe your children's age or stage or, or issue, this is something that parents kind of get together. This is a commonality that they have. So, like, I think that's the first step. And, when you see this, like this happens in communities, like all the time, where there's gatherings, like powwow or, trips where, especially today, where they're doing activities with children to tan hides and to develop tools to make moose meat over the fire and bannock over the fire. And it's like a cooking activity, and, children love to eat. So, this is a great place to make that connection. And as well, I think about the community activities that we already provide. We provide communities activities, let's say with health and social services. Sometimes they'll plan activities at the beach for families. And these are great opportunities. And in this time of COVID, unfortunately, where we have roles and we got to put masks on and we have to disinfect. So, outdoor activities are great. All you got to do is be one moose apart. So powwows, like they'll have a Christmas parade I've seen actually a Christmas parade down here in Wendake. They had a little parade going on, and that was last year, and there was little floats, and we did the same thing in our community of Kitigan-Zibi, and I see this happening in other communities, which provides, children with entertainment. They have music, and like the cultural music, we used to have violin, and as well the transfer of the language, the knowledge. And, like the activities that we do as well, like sliding. It's a nice time to get outside to go sliding with the children. And I used to try and do that, but it's hard to find the hills. So we used to have a snowplow come by and make a mountain, a little mountain inside the playground. And children went up, 6 feet and went down. Woo, it was fun. And but I guess too that I really, really want to say this, and I will, but multi-sectorial tables. Like I find it so important. Not only do we have the village of attachment where people are actually getting together and doing these kind of activities, but also, that we are there with the support services that we as early childhood caregivers and as directors of daycares to be a part of that, a part of the decision making, the policy, and to communicate what we need as caregivers so that the attachment and the program for the children could flourish. So I encourage people to, get to know your band council, get to know your health services and all the programs and activities that are involved in those areas, and see how you could be a part of that. And because it's supposed to, all the machine runs together, right? And together is how we're going to make it better. So that's what I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. That's right. Things need to happen at a policy level as well to create the right conditions for children to thrive. When we do see children that we know at these community events, and this, how we greet warmly, I'm sure this is something that you already do and know. But again, talking to the parents reassures the child that they are in a village, wherever you meet.
It's a beautiful slide though, just being by the lake, when we're stuck in a city, this is something that goes, oof. Can actually feel a little comfort in this photo.
Yes, and being in nature, oh my gosh, how powerful. Yeah.
And which brings me to think, like how many programs out there are made outside, to do outdoor activities. Like how many daycares do that, or programs have this, to spend a certain amount of time, I'm not saying in -20, but that's programmed and that's geared to enhance the learning of children 0 to 4. Like this is something that is done more and more. It'll be very, very interesting to see that. I haven't seen anything concrete yet because it's COVID time there, but I'm sure people in your individual communities, your programs, this should be something considered, because I know there's some beautiful programs out there that people have done, and I'd be anxious to see one live. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, indeed. We got our children outside every day, and I'll show you some pictures of that, but I couldn't agree with you more, Cheryl. Being outside is key for the young child. Here is where the things become a little bit clearer in a way. We've already talked about attachment as the greatest need that we have. So given that attachment is our greatest need, separation is our greatest fear. There's a little child clinging to his caregiver. It just captures that emotion for me of how much a little child depends on us. And separation from the ones that children know brings them alarm and something they then can go and have a lot of frustration, and also they will try to pursue the person who they feel safe with. All things we've seen. But what our goal is in taking care of children, of course, is to have them feel safe in our care and free them from this worry about who's taking care of them. So in this next section, I'm going to talk just a little bit about how to do that. I've already touched on it here and there with the greetings and building the village of connection and having a connection with the child, if it's possible, in more neutral areas outside of the classroom where they can see you interacting with their parents or their caregivers, whoever that may be. But the central question, I believe, of the child is, who is taking care of me? And so if we can answer that, and it doesn't mean talking about it, it means on an emotional level, who is taking care of me? We began to we create this mantle of familiar, trustworthy people who the child has a relationship with. So this can be a long process. And then this child will feel safe within that village. And that's what we mean by village. It's not a physical village, though it can be and probably should be and probably was. But now it can be quite dispersed, who is in your village. If it's possible, before a child is left in care, if it's possible to establish a relationship with the family, this will help in answering that question. When you're seeing around the community, parents speak about their caregivers outside of when at home, to build up this connection. When a parent feels confident, this helps the child feel confident. This is a quote from Deborah McNamara, who's on the faculty of the Neufeld Institute and has written a book called Rest, Play, Grow, which is a deep dive into these concerns for early childhood. And I think this one is important, that children don't simply feel at home wherever they are planted. They must be rooted through attachment. So what do we mean? By planted, I think she means wherever we plunk them, put them with a babysitter or, at childcare, but they're not going to necessarily feel at home in that situation. If we can somehow root the child in an attached relationship with us before they come to our centers, before they're left in our care, this can be a powerful way to reduce the stress and alarm they're going to feel by attachment. We know that this releases a lot of hormones into the system that it can impede development. So now we're talking about home, and home is where one starts from. T.S. Eliot is an author. So building attachment is a process. So we have a very broad definition of home in this. Might not actually be the physical home, but it might be the place where a child receives comfort with a grandparent, with an aunt, with a caregiver, with a parent, wherever home is for that child. That sometimes it is the care center, but it's a place where the child feels safe, comfortable, noticed, and cared for. So that is home. There are three pillars of attachment that we will be talking about in more detail in subsequent sessions. The one I want to touch on today is called matchmaking. So every day, if we can build the child's sense that you are a person to be trusted, we work with the parent and the parent-teacher relationship. When a child witnesses us being warm and friendly with a parent, a grandparent, anybody that they already trust and love, it helps them trust and love us. And this is part of creating this attachment womb. The attachment womb is necessary for nature to continue doing its work of developing maturation. So when do we have these opportunities? We've already talked about how we may have those opportunities within our community. We also have the opportunity of greeting a parent warmly and having a chat, sometimes at drop-off and pickup, just brief, friendly exchanges. This orients the child to the person who's taking care of them, and they think, well, if my mother thinks this person's okay, or my father thinks this person's okay, then I guess I can think they're okay. It's that simple for them. We know this from our own experiences in life, introductions through people we already know and trust, very much a way that we operate as adults. And again, I've talked to you about speaking to the adult and not the shy child, but just sort of gesturing toward them or smiling or whatever, but not expecting them to greet us with good morning. The other, I will just mention here that the other pillars of attachment from Dr. Neufeld's teachings are collecting and bridging. So we're going to talk about those more in the next session. But collecting, just simplified, is a matter of greeting. Just to greet is a way of starting to build that connection. If it's possible, prior to being left for the day, if the parent or guardian visits several times for a few weeks ahead of time before class starts, or can create short days for the first few weeks, this is a great way for a child to get oriented to the classroom and to who's in charge of them. I found it interesting. I never really looked at this picture, but there are 4 adults in this room, but the children are all looking at me. So there was a recognition. I've already been with them for an entire year. It was a recognition of my leadership role with them, and they were orienting to me. This is circle time. If drop off is hard, and it is possible in the flurry of the day to make a call to the parents, or if there's been an upsetting incident or something like that, I don't know if you're able to call the parent. I felt that this was something that I was able to do and that the parents truly appreciated. Then I think you also have some kind of daily communication often set up in a childcare center where you tell the crucial facts about how the day went. There are often conferences that are held throughout the year with the teacher, the main caregiver, probably social communication, social occasions rather at school. And then I found that having clear health guidelines and policies was incredibly important to avoid upset on the part of the parents if their child didn't fit into the criteria of being well enough to come to school. Cheryl, do you have anything to add about the communications that you're aware of in your community between the school, the daycare center, and the parents?
Well, thinking about it, like I'm responsible for 8 English communities. And in there, like we usually provide them with a book that the commission has developed. And in there, there's like a program, like a little checklist thing where you fill out, how the child ate, how the child slept, and how the day went overall. So these are available at the Health Commission through our pedagogy, and we usually provide this upon request. And thinking about what I used to do when I worked in daycare, I'd have an integration plan for the parents. So what you were talking about before, where the parent brings in the child, well, we had this plan to slowly introduce them into the program. So that means the parent brought them in from a certain time, let's say in the morning, from the first snack, 9 o'clock. They have snack and then they go, and upon the week increases, the time increases. So if they stay the first day for snack, then they're going to stay for lunch. And then after lunch, they're going to stay for nap time. And then after nap time, they're going to stay till early afternoon. And then finally, it's a full day. So this really, I found, helped us to have the child's trust. Like you're saying, we created a trust while we were ensuring that the maturation of the child grew. And especially now, like the Ministère Quebec is looking at these things, in terms of the relationship of the educator and the child, the relationship of the educator and the parent, because they see that this is increasingly more and more important, that creation of trust, and to help the child, integrate into a program, but also to help the parents separate from the child. And I'm going to tell you this one story there where I worked with this family when I used to work in a city. And the mother was Creole. And she spoke very little English. And when she brought her child to the center, well, I was that caregiver. I was the alpha that the parent has to hand the child to. And I took the child in day after day, and the child never said a word to me. Like I lived weeks, that child not talking to me, not saying nothing, zero. And it took like at least, I don't know, maybe a month. But what I learned later on was the child was trying her best to learn English. And her mother says, like, I don't know why she's not speaking at daycare, but at home, she's like a little bird. As soon as she gets home from daycare, she's talking all the time. So, like I just kept up to date with her, and I gave her the daily reports and say, she's certainly eating well and she's sleeping well. And one day she came in, and like in the first earlier days, the mother came in and she looked at her child sleeping during nap time, and she started to cry. So I pulled her aside and I told her, like our child is fine, like the child is sleeping very well, and understand that you're worried, and like she's doing very well according to me. And I said, just keep bringing her in, we'll work with her. And I just provided as much comfort and information to that parent as I could. And I told her she's welcome anytime to come to the daycare to see her child, since they were so close. And soon after, I was doing circle time. I was telling the children, what day is it? What day of the week is it? What month? And we're counting. And then that child looks at me and she just goes, beep, when it was her turn to talk. So I started doing the same thing. I was making that sameness. I just went, beep. So she kept saying beep, 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 beep. And then all of a sudden she started speaking. I was floored because she could speak English pretty well. But I guess it's that trust, and it's that sameness and that belonging and that trust. It had to come, as it came naturally according to nature's plan. So that was one of my most heartwarming communication stories.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah.
See, you jumped ahead of me by bringing in being playful and imitating back. That is just such a great story.
Oh, it's nice to be an educator, I miss that. I actually really miss that. I spent maybe about 8 years in the classroom. And I really enjoyed that experience. And I had actually a recent experience to go back in the classroom there just recently, and it was just so sweet to be around, these young ones again. Anyway, that's it.
Well, I think that, thank you, Cheryl. I miss, there's no place I'd rather be than the classroom, but I found that my age and energy can't keep up with it as well as it used to. I think that we will take a break now. I'm going to stop sharing. We'll pick up where we left off, which isn't quite where we meant to leave off, but I think it will be fine. And Cheryl, do you have more comments that you'd like to make before we close for a 15-minute break?
Well, I guess, if this is the place where, I want to summarize things. Is this
Yeah,
it?
This will be fine. Yes.
Okay, but just going back to the matchmaking, people will understand, when I look at the daycares that I worked in, that one educator that the child wants to go to all the time. When they get dropped off in the morning, they're not comfortable with anybody else. And it has to be that one educator. And, as a director, I had to make sure that that happened, for that child every time they came in. And then it was like a slow easing to the next person, but telling them I'm always here. So I was pretty fortunate in having, the educators that I worked with do that kind of, provide that kind of care. And I think that that's especially important in bonding and attachment, because they bond with their primary caregiver, their parent, but during the day, it becomes the educator. And I think that a program will prosper from an integration plan. if that could be part of your policy to help that develop. And when I think of, what you said earlier on, Leanna, you talked about everything that I do with my child influences who they become. And that is a very powerful saying in itself, because, like when I decided to work in early childhood, I had to understand, the reasons why do we choose this field, and for me, it was because I liked children, and there was so many of them in the family. And I just loved being around them and teaching them and singing with them and having fun. And, like we choose that field, but later on, as nature's planned it, and as we grow later on, I learned the impact that I'd have on these children. And this is through, taking educational courses at CEGEP or workshops on the side. And I developed my skills as an educator. And this really enabled me to see now, the developing child, and to learn about all the ages and stages of development. And then I became a parent. And I was so happy to have those skills. Because, like planned parenting, like I see planned parenting much like, your decision to go into early childhood. But what happens when your parenting is unplanned? Like you learn these things anyway, as nature has planned it for you. You learn that you need to, what kind of impact that you're going to have on this child. You learn, to develop your skills as the child ages. And, the brain has time, that it needs time to build the experiences, like you said before, like building experiences positive. They need to be provided with these positive experiences, because this is how the brain makes its connections. And I'm going back to drop-off time with the children, like when you drop off a child, let's say I'm the educator, I become the alpha. I'm the one who says, okay, I'm going to take care of you, and everything is going to be okay today. And this is what we got planned, and let's just have fun and do our thing today. And I wanted to mention to you, like you talked about attachment being instinctual and powerful. And I'll tell you this story, but one day I was working, I was in my office, and all the educators were on the floor, and the building started to shake. So everything was shaking, like, and I was like scared. And the first thing like that came to my head was, go and get the babies, like get the babies out.
Yeah,
So
wonderful alpha instincts, amazing.
Yeah, so I ran out of my office, and I went to see the babies. Where are the babies? This was an earthquake that was happening. Everything was shaking. I ran while the floor was shaking beneath my feet. And the first thing I wanted to do was get the babies out.
Yeah. Amazing, our instincts, how strong they are.
Yes, so naming the actual things that I was living there, being in attachment is instinctual, attachment is powerful, there's this predisposition of togetherness and pursuit, for preservation. So these are all the things that I lived in a span of 30 seconds.
And thank goodness you didn't have to think about it, right? Because that's what instincts are. They're wired into us, so we don't have to think in the moments that are so crucial and critical for the little babies. Yeah, yeah. I'm noticing the time, Cheryl, and I'm just thinking that if we want to maybe give people a 15-minute break right now, and then get back at quarter to 3.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to share my screen again with you. We have the second part of our presentation now is on this very important piece about the brain development and what makes a preschooler different than an adult, what makes them unique. This is a place where once we understand it, it can completely impact our way of responding to children. It did for me. So preschoolers, and again, what I mean by that is birth to 7. They're inspiring to be with because of these lovely attributes of intense curiosity, joy and wonder, and taking delight in what they do and how much we are delighted by who they are. They are very present and they're quite infectious. And on the other hand, they are impulsive. We can't trust that they won't just say or do something. This is the side of them that is stunning about how little they are like adults. What do we do with this side of them then becomes the question. This impulsiveness, the fact that they're inconsiderate of others. When here we're talking about sharing and what they want and what's fair, just the taking away of things, and other kinds of aggression too, actually. And that they're very needy. And we've discussed the neediness quite a bit already. So I won't dwell on that. But what is really interesting about this, putting this together with brain development, is that this is how they are meant to be. And it's not on purpose, that they know much to behave, and we can help them not by teaching what to do, but by taking over and becoming responsible for the part of the brain that is not yet functioning. So what that means is basically that they are immature. And so here we have a lovely photo of a little tiny flower on a tomato plant. And it then grows into this gorgeous round red fruit. And so it is with the preschoolers. They have within them all they need to grow into maturity and to grow into caring adults. And if we can think of ourselves as the gardeners bringing the conditions for flourishing to happen, the main takeaway from this part of the presentation is the phrase, one thought at a time. This is the phrase that when I heard it, I went, oh, this explains so much. That they are focused, they are present, they have one thought at a time. They are only focused on what is actually engaging them, what's in front of them, what they are doing. And if we can respect and protect this, it's a wonderful playground in nature's plan for them to gain self-knowledge. It is really good preparation for future schoolwork. But what does it mean for their behavior? Here we have a picture of the brain, and the prefrontal cortex is the piece of the brain that we are concerned with in their development right now. Right in front of it is this part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. You can see the arrows pointing to that pink area. This is where children who have matured, so by the age of 5, 6, 7, they are able to consider what they are doing rather than to impulsively act, to blurt out comments like that smells, or I don't like grandma's meatloaf, or whatever. I don't like this, taking toys away from others, biting, etc. They know better than they can act. They easily get into sensory overload. And if we can look at children and understand that the child's brain is developing the capacity to consider others, to consider other points of view, it's not there yet. It's not there yet. And when we understand that, suddenly all of this behavior, which can be very troubling and which we think we can teach them not to behave that way, suddenly begins to make sense, and we can have a different approach to what we're doing about the protecting others and caring for this child in this early developmental phase. So
I
again,
think, yeah.
oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I just want to say, I think the really important thing is exactly what you said, in the sense that this is not something that we teach a child. This is something that has to grow within a child, right? It has to grow in,
Yes.
that brain has to happen. And I know we want to rush them because we want them to share and to be kind and all those things. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Eva. And again, this is nature's plan. We have a way of understanding this as self-discovery. And when you're discovering who you are, you kind of block out other influences and other ways of thinking. Eventually that goes away. And it's interesting because once it goes away, it never returns. So this part of childhood is very, very special in its own way. There's a belief in magic and wonder and so on. But in the meantime, we have a lot of problem behaviors from the point of view of making children civilized. So the first one is this untempered nature. They are not like us. They have no filters. They think only one thought at a time, so they are unable to weigh the consequences of how others might feel, or what might be safe, or what might be socially appropriate at any given moment. What is fair to them is what they want, right? And we cannot make them different, as Eva was saying, or be in charge of their reaction. This is a matter of development. So our role is to protect their feelings, protect their dignity, but gently and firmly setting boundaries for what is okay in a classroom. And this we do by becoming, it's a mighty task to be responsible for a lot of people who are very immature, and get in charge, get ahead of them, taking charge of difficult situations, being in the lead, being the place where they're orbiting, and stepping in and constructing a classroom that will take into account this level of immaturity. This is nature's way of growing a child. And for me, once I learned that, it helped me navigate very tricky territory.
I love the thought, and that, again, I think you were the one that actually alerted me to this, is that they do need to be in their own little kind of dream world, their own little personal space, their own little personal world, because they're in the process of having to construct who they are. And we can't, they're not yet ready to include anybody really else in that. And so we have to kind of keep them out of trouble, but they need to do that so they can develop well. And that's such a powerful message. When you said that, I thought, oh my goodness, we need to let them do that growing and developing.
Yes, and at the same time, as we're talking about this, we have to realize they're being put into social situations where we have the safety of the whole group to consider. So this becomes then the dance of how we deal with protecting both sides of the coin. We are functioning as that part of the brain that isn't functioning in the child. That's our role. And they are inconsiderate in their relating. They can only have one thought at a time. How many times that we repeat that phrase, one thought at a time. So if they're considering themselves, which they do, they're not particularly considering others. And if they're considering others, they're not particularly considering themselves. Now, if you were a nurse and you came upon an accident, and somebody was hurt, you would not consider, is there blood on my clothes? Is there, is somebody waiting for me someplace else? You would simply take care of the situation. And this is somewhat like this young child. Once they're considering the other person, they don't have any feelings for themselves anymore. And if they're having mostly consideration of themselves, they're not thinking about the other person.
Yeah. And I just want to, I think that's really an important point there, Lena, because sometimes people will say, well, young children, well, they can be kind sometimes. Why can't they be kind all the time? But the kindness is natural. It's that part of that natural caring instincts, but it's towards when they don't have any worries about themselves, they can be very kind to other people. But boy, as soon as it becomes personal, now they can't think about the other person. So they are really black and white, lovely, kind, generous, and very, very selfish on the other hand as well. And that's part of nature's plan. Because it is part of who they are. That kindness is part of who they are, but they can't yet, until they get older, be able to be kind to someone else and still think of themselves, and vice versa. And they could I think maybe you probably saw that. Sometimes they give away some of their favorite things and then they get upset because they didn't mean to give it away. I don't know if you saw acts of kindness like that kind of surprised even them.
Right. And what happens as the frontal lobes develop is that capacity for just one thought at a time is replaced by, on the other hand, yes, I like this. On the other hand, my friend likes it too. I'll let them have it. Whatever it is, they're suddenly thinking in duality instead of just the focus on one thought at a time. It's very interesting. I often use an example of this too, which is slightly different than what you're saying, Eva, is if you're sitting around a table with children and something falls on the floor, and as an adult, I would think, oh, we'll take care of that later. There is no way that we can do that. Their thought is with the piece of fruit, that the clementine piece that has dropped on the floor, and it has to be dealt with in that moment. That is just how focused they are on their perspective and their one thought at a time. It goes away. But in the meantime, be prepared to pick up the fruit off the floor. And they are also not like us because they have problems with separation. As we begin to understand their developmental needs, we begin to see them differently and we manage them more easily, going back to the taking pleasure in being together slide earlier. And again, to use the metaphor of being gardeners, knowing that separation is a child's greatest fear, knowing this helps us to acknowledge and respect their fear and sadness. We allow this sadness to be expressed without saying it's okay when they're actually hurt or it's not okay, which is really hard sometimes to be in the face of sadness and separation fears. But I have found that if one can actually respect that in the child, that they're feeling that way, and not do a big distraction or in some way try to divert that, but rather flow with it. And this depends on the circumstance. Sometimes it's not the appropriate thing to do. But when you feel it and you feel like you can hold them in their fear and their sadness at separation, they generally get through it and bounce back really, really quickly. Acceptance of feelings. This is a difficult thing for us to do with young children who we want so much for them to be happy and full of fun and play, when in fact, often this is a time of life when there is a lot of sadness to be experienced. So when we can, when it's appropriate, to just accept that and to move in and help them with those emotions.
Yes. And again, I think the emotions are there one at a time, right? They're either I've seen little ones, be super happy 1 minute and 2 seconds later just burst into tears and completely distraught about something. And again, the idea being that they need to, in order to be able to use their emotions to kind of counter each other, they need to experience pure joy, pure sadness, pure frustration, pure alarm. And that's hard for us because as adults, when we see a child who's really scared, we just want to fix it. And it doesn't mean to say that we don't help the child, but we also need to honor that that something is important is going on inside of them. I'm scared my mommy won't come back. We need to honor that, because in that moment, we're giving them permission to feel the alarm that they need to feel. As they get older, as you say, it will start to kind of mix a little bit more. But it's so hard, because when you see a 3-year-old desperately crying or desperately being frustrated, it's such an intense emotion. We're not used to that as adults.
Yes, we're not, and yet this is the moment to move in and provide comfort, because they are in, as you say, Eva, one emotion at a time, not just one thought at a time. So we're taking on this big responsibility for this immature brain when we're dealing with young children. And they will learn, and their brain starts to get wired up, and they will learn what is appropriate social behavior. We just need to protect this time and know that that is in them. It is in them to be kind. They are very empathetic. They want to be good. They really want to be good. So we are the answer by taking on this responsibility. This is the hardest part of working with young children, in my opinion, to actually be able to anticipate conflict, anticipate problems, plan for them, have enough structure in the room so that things don't just deteriorate, and to be in the lead. We call it being in the lead with the emotions of the young child, and the fact that there is violence towards each other, biting and taking things, and all, it's all there. And this is what Dr. Neufeld calls the most violent time of life.
It's a good thing they're little, huh?
It's a good thing that they're little, and it's a good thing that we're not, and that we can figure it out ahead of time. Yeah. So our role as caring adults is to provide that safety and comfort, and to shield and to understand who they are developmentally, and that their feelings and thoughts and impulses need to be treated with hospitality and acceptance for them to move forward in their maturation. I can think of times, I'm sure you can too, often in my workshops, I ask people to think of a time when they were feeling something as an adult, as a child, and somebody talked you out of it, or said, oh, well, there's this, and did on the other hand towards you as an adult. And how that really didn't help. That what was needed for me in these situations was somebody who could listen to what I was feeling and be there as a source of comfort, rather than telling me that it was okay, or that I shouldn't feel that way, or that I was too sensitive.
Calm down, right? Oh,
or calm down.
That's the red flag for me. Eva, calm down. Yeah. If I could calm down, I would, but I need to express something right now. Please listen to me. And of course, I'm an adult, so I could say those words. Imagine if you're a little 3-year-old who can barely say those words.
Right. Yeah, that's it, Eva. Please listen to me. And that's really, I love this picture. There we are in that kind of space. Not that this child is feeling anything but love, but we can imagine perhaps there would be another moment of emotion. This little sketch, Eva, do you have something more to say?
No.
Okay. This little sketch is from Dr. Neufeld, and it captures what is right relationship between a child and an adult. So the adult's role is to be a provider. And we can make the list of all the things that are being provided by an adult, from the hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, and all of that, but also love, acceptance, hospitality, and what Dr. Neufeld calls the invitation to exist. You matter. You can be here, even if you're sad, even if you're upset, and so on. And the child is seeking, and we call that a dependent instinct. And when a child is soft-hearted, they will seek care from this providing adult. So our goal is to keep them actually dependent in a certain way on our care. This is, I don't mean, we don't really have time to go into this, I'm so sorry, but it's the irony of the situation that the more you help a child cultivate dependence on you, I will provide, I will take care of you, I am the alpha in this situation, the more quickly they become independent. This is the case. We can think of an example of a child who's able to walk, whose parents perhaps say, well, all right, you can walk now, so walk, versus the parent who says, I know you can walk, but I love carrying you, and picks them up and carries them. And that child really wants to walk, then that put me down. Yeah. And the child who is being asked to walk when perhaps they are not ready for that all the time, is asking to be carried.
Yeah, they actually did research. They did
Wow.
research on that, yes, where they exactly did that. They said to some parents, like, let your little one, if they want to be picked up, pick them up whenever you can. And they're, just at that kind of critical stage where they're pretty good at walking, but they get tired pretty quickly. And basically, then the other parents were told to, encourage your child to be independent. I mean, I don't think they wanted the parents to be mean to the children, but, just the normal thing. Well, he can walk, so he should be told to walk. And then they watched, as time passed, and I don't remember how long they took, but when they came back to it, what they found was the children who had been generously picked up actually wanted to walk on their own, and the ones for whom their need, whatever, and remember, they're not necessarily always just asking to be picked up from walking. They're asking because something's not working for them and they want your comfort. Those children were much more whiny, much harder to, they just didn't want to be on their own, so they became clingy. So it's that paradox, is when you meet the dependency needs, the desire for independence grows.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, and the word you used, Eva, that's so beautiful in this is graciousness. When we are gracious with our care, then it provides a different level of independence seeking in the child.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the, when you're talking about some of the things that we as adults can do a little bit differently, that doesn't, it takes some personal sort of coaching ourselves to do it. But when I finally understood this, I realized that if I was going to give something to a child, if I was going to respond to a child, I actually had to put a smile in my face and really do it in a generous kind of a way. I mean, I was feeling somewhat generous inside, but to really make it clear to the child, oh yes, of course. And when especially with other adults who are more hands-on with children, when they started to go, oh, I'm so happy to do this for you, that graciousness, the child sort of filled with that love. And it was a simple little thing for an adult to do. Putting that little smile into your eyes is not that hard. It does require to school yourself to remember that the child is looking to see, am I a burden, or are you happy to take care of me? And so just a little tiny, I'm so happy to do this for you. Of course, I'd love to tie your shoes. you're going to tie the shoes, then do it graciously, do it generously. That fills the child full of that attachment need that we talked about in the first half. And when they're full of that attachment need, then we see beautiful growth and development.
That's right. And it's often also, Eva, you mentioned shoe tying. It's a wonderful time in getting a child dressed to go outdoors and undressed when they come back in these cold climates where we live. That is an incredible time to be gracious with your care, to have fun, to make it a joyful experience, and to organize it in a certain way so that the child begins to learn, well, we actually don't put our boots on first, we put our snow pants on first. But to give that generously, even if you have 3 or 4 to dress at once, to come up with a way of helping so they're not so struggling so much with this cumbersome burden of getting dressed to be outside, which is hard for them. One of my teachers often said, the time to build attachment is in times of bodily care, especially when you're very busy with a lot of children. So when you're changing a diaper, when you're helping with toileting, when you're getting them dressed, when you're providing food, all of these are moments when you can be the provider and be a gracious provider and build an attached relationship. And that's those are the things that often as a parent say, oh, you rush through the diaper changes, or you rush through the this or the that, and you work on attachment other places. But actually, these are built-in moments. This is beautiful. This must be nature's plan as well, because these are built-in moments for building right relationship with a child. They really can't do these things for themselves. And it's really a time to focus on them and have it be special.
Yeah, you get the job done, but that is the job, right? It's like,
Right.
you're not rushing to get the diaper change so you can, play with them. You're actually using the diaper change, which they need anyway, as that moment of connection. And then they don't need you to play with them because they can go play on their own. So it's the connection that's so important, and finding those moments in a busy day. And I imagine many of the childcare workers my goodness, are really struggling with how you meet the needs of all the children. But it's one-on-one in that moment. You can build so much, and it means so much to the child.
And yes, and just to build on that a tiny bit, Eva, when you have filled them up, excuse me, emotionally through this connection at times of bodily care, then they will venture forth in play or independence, whatever lens we're using to look at the moment. This is an image of, we're nearly at the end now. I wanted to bring in a picture of a garden, because thriving and gardens and planting and nature is so much the metaphor of this presentation and all of our work with children. When we have provided conditions, then we have a thriving community. And we now have covered a lot of what the conditions are for building attachment with a child, which is the womb, in which the greenhouse in which they grow, is that warm, enveloping sense of, I know who's taking care of me. I know that I'm okay. I know that I belong. I know that I'm like this person. All of these stages of attachment that we're seeing in the birth to 4-year-olds fall into a thriving garden for our children's maturation.
I love this picture. It's got to be one of my favorite pictures. Those 2 little girls with their wonder and their
Yes.
openness, and just, and you see, especially on that little one, oh, you could just tell that she wants to be a good little kid, I mean, right now she's probably looking at something interesting, but you just see that desire to be, but of course they just can't necessarily, but if we create those conditions, they will get there. Yeah, I love this picture.
Yes, and she does look to be looking at something very intently. Maybe there's a caterpillar walking along there, but her face just captures the wonder of the moment of childhood. And children put their attention on the person who is they're most attached to and who has the alpha instinct to lead them. These are the adults that they will follow. And when they follow us, our life becomes easier in a classroom. We don't have so much disruption to the flow of the day. Attachment helps heal. We're not always able to fix what's happening, but if we provide this warm, loving atmosphere and our open hearts, it helps us work with nature. It helps us be with the children in the way that makes them feel safe and in a place of acceptance. But not feeling like we can fix or able to fix or need to fix everything is an important aspect of this work, because there's a lot of there are many demands made upon somebody in childcare field profession, and there's the thing we can do is to provide this warm atmosphere. That we can do. Do you have anything to add, Eva?
Yeah. Well, because I think as well, I mean, sometimes we're painfully aware of some of the challenges that the child faces in their personal life, and our heart just goes out to them and we want to try and fix it. But I think, again, and this is what I love about the developmental approach, and I've been in the field long enough, working both with adults and with children and with adolescents who have difficulties. And when we understood that time is on our side, and when we just bit by bit just kept creating that atmosphere, that sense of belonging, it might have sometimes taken 2-3 years when we could see the change happening within the child, and we had to really trust in creating and not trying to rush things too much, but also believe, and again, Dr. Neufeld says the potential continues throughout the lifespan. So we might be working with a child who is, quite distressed because of a lot of things, but, one of the things we're hoping through this course is to help people to find just a little tiny different way of responding, so that for that child, that moment when they are with us, the time that when they are with us, they can just kind of rest in us, and again, that beautiful little thing where the child looks to us, can rest in us, and that the growth will happen. But we have to be very patient. It can sometimes take years to see the fruits of what we do, but we will see the fruits. We have within us the capacity to make a tiny little change in a child's life. Might not be all that our hearts want to do, but a little change, the right kind of change. And I guess maybe that's what we're trying to get here, is what is the best thing we can do? If we only have so much energy, what is that best thing that we can do? And we might not see it. It's like roots. We don't see the roots developing, but later on we see the beautiful plant growing, and the stronger the roots are, the stronger the plant will be. But we don't see, sometimes it takes a long time for those roots to grow and we aren't seeing it, but we know it's there. And I think that's what's really critical, is having faith that we are the answer. And you had mentioned that in one of your other slides. We are the answer for children. We have to be very patient and very confident.
Yes. And with the Neufeld paradigm, I think Eva and I would both agree, you have a very, very firm foundation to stand on.
Yeah.
So there are some questions for reflection. I don't know exactly how you want to go about doing this now. Should we turn to Cheryl for a moment?
Yeah, I don't know if did you have a couple of the other questions? Just people could maybe consider them, and then if they want to type into the chat, just something that stood out for them in the presentation. I don't know what the other questions are. I don't.
Well, I was thinking originally when I did this that would be a takeaway, but I think it's also a really good chance to type into the chat a few things and also perhaps take them away. Maybe more particularly if you're working in a classroom, but also for anybody who is interested in the childcare profession. So what stood out for me in this presentation was the first question. And the next one is, how might this be useful in my work? Anything that you learned that might be useful in your work. Wish I could put these all in one place. So what stood out? What might be useful in your work? And what changes, if any, would I like to make in my practice or at my center?
Well, I guess I could go first to just talk about what takeaways I'm getting from this.
Right.
As the first one, and waiting for others who actually work in the field now directly with children. For me, like it's not new, but what I would have liked to know at the time, like these traits of children, you say that they're impulsive, inconsiderate, needy, immature. These are all traits that are normal to children. And as the provider of care, we need to be very aware of that. And, like to know that they have no filter. These are things, like we knew at the, as you have children or as you begin to work with them. But when it's normal, then you do want to work with them to protect their dignity and to make sure that, you do it in a supple way, where you're teaching them how to cope, how to understand themselves. And it can't be a complicated affair. And I liked what you said about the dressing routine, like the time to build an attachment is during bodily care. And I thought about diaper changing, dressing the children, tying their shoes, combing their hair, doing their nails, giving them a bath. Like these are all special times. And, it's hard though for, an educator to do this when she has other children to pertain to, to care for. And I think it's especially important to make sure that you do get some time with each child individually. I like that part. And I had a question, when you talked about anxiety and separation and attachment, like what's happening in the brain during this period? That you talked about the prefrontal cortex, and just to give a little summary of what is happening in the brain with our young babies when this is occurring.
Eva?
Sure. Well, I mean, because we're wired as human beings to be very sensitive to our attachment world. So it's perfectly normal for a baby, to cry when they leave their mother's arms. That's just part of the human nature saying, I'm not happy right now, I'd rather be with my mommy. And of course, we know we have to do things. But as the child matures, so this is such a huge difference between a 7-year-old, and I'm going to use 7 as kind of the turning point because it could happen at 5 or maybe at 6, but by 7, it's pretty clear. You can say to a well-developed 7-year-old, mommy and daddy need to go right now, but auntie's going to take care of you. And if that prefrontal cortex is functioning, the child will remember back that you already talked to them about how auntie's looking forward to, cooking with you and whatever. And so your instinct, which says, don't go, mommy, can be countered by a thought that says, oh, but it's going to be okay because mommy and dad, you know what I mean? Like the brain, different parts of the brain can work together to kind of calm down a very primitive emotional system. But prior to the age of 7 years old, and with some children for whom life has not gone well, when they think you're going to abandon them, I mean, they feel like you're leaving forever. That's why there's like, because it feels forever in that moment. And bit by bit as they grow, and again, it's a bit by bit thing. It doesn't like boom, magically like a light goes on at 7 years old, but bit by bit, little parts of the brain start compensating for other parts of the brain. But that's why we have to wait for that to happen naturally. You can't say to a 4-year-old or to a 3-year-old, you know, we can say it, but we have to understand it might not land because the brain isn't quite ready yet. Again, it's little bit by little bit, you can see it happen. And there are things we can do. So that's why it's so important to do that matchmaking, because when you notice that, Cheryl, and you said that so beautifully, when the child is getting comfortable in the center, now they're going to gravitate to the next person who's going to take care of them. So they're quite happy to leave mommy and daddy behind if they can find that person that they know is going to take care of them. And again, that's where the beauty of one thought at a time. A 3-year-old or a 2-year-old will sometimes even say, "Go, mommy, go." And you go, "Oh, this kid doesn't have separation anxiety," because they're already attached to the next person. So their brain says, "Oh, I'm safe. It's okay now. You can go." So it's again, the brain is kind of trying to figure its way through things. And we have to be so patient because we can't teach it. It has to grow in it. And I think I have a little bit of difficulty with even the word daycare educator because it gives the wrong impression. It gives that we can train the brain, but you can't train the brain. You can just grow a brain. So, I mean, we have a lot of undoing to do in terms of how we see things on the one hand, but I think on the other hand, culture will often compensate for that. When we had villages where there was grandmothers and aunties and uncles, so many times, and again, I think back to my own heritage as a Hungarian, where people would say, "Oh, don't worry, we'll take care of her, she'll be all right. Oh, no, don't worry, that's perfectly normal." Like older people were able to tell my mother, "Oh, don't worry, that's perfectly normal." And I think that's the beauty of a village. And again, I'm sure you've heard that many times, Cheryl, right? When an older person will say, "It's okay, they'll grow out of it."
Yes, definitely.
Right? Right. Yeah.
I have a comment. I just wanted to share that I've been an educator here at Step by Step for about 17 years before moving into the role of Pedagogy and Resource Services Coordinator. And what I've noticed, what's really come to my attention and was mentioned in the conversation today is that oftentimes I think that we forget as educators that all those opportunities for being with children during like the diaper changing and during dressing them for outdoors and undressing for outdoors, that those are such key moments in their day. And I think in our efforts to kind of get through the day and get through all the routines and move on to the next item on our agenda, we sometimes have to stop and realize and recognize how important those moments really are. And I think that certainly within our center, that's a discussion that we try to have, but I think we still have work to do in that area. I think it's just a good reminder for everybody.
Thanks for saying that so eloquently.
Yeah.
That particular teaching, thank you for that, came from Emmy Pickler, who ran an orphanage in Budapest. And because the ratios were so high, 7 children to 1 caregiver, that was her solution. Fill them up emotionally during times of bodily care. And of course, it is so transferable to everyday life. It just makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
And there is no more important agenda than that relationship. This is one of the things we have to be careful about. We think we need to stimulate children and do all sorts of things with them, but when they are in that strong relationship with us, and I notice we have some speech and language pathologists here, so we're really concerned about good language development. But when they are attached to us, they want to imitate us. When they imitate us, what are they going to imitate? What we do naturally as humans, which is to talk. So really, the more we can focus on those, and again, when you're dressing, you can be talking, you can be, you know what I mean? Like there's so many, and then if the child's attached to you. There was actually a piece of research that was done at Saint Justin Hospital with 1-day-old babies, where they basically, I don't remember what the purpose of the research was, but I know what I got out of it was they looked at the language part of the brain when the mother spoke to the baby, and the language part of the brain when a female nurse spoke to the baby. And what they found was when the mother spoke to the baby, the language part of the brain lit right up. But when the nurse spoke to the baby, it was the voice recognition part of the brain. A 1-day-old baby's brain was already knew who the mother was because obviously they heard the mother in the womb. But then the brain was saying, do I know you? Just that split second of do I know you before it got to the language part of the brain already, I think, makes a huge difference in terms of language development. The more the child is attached to us, the more spontaneously they will learn language from us. So let's work on attachment before we work on speech development. You know what I mean? Like I know it's just work on that. When they're attached to us, they want to be just like us. So it's worth taking the time.
Is that why, like when you first have a baby, let's say I'm going to bring the dads in now, but they ask the dad to take off his shirt so that the baby can have that skin on skin contact with the baby.
Yeah. I mean, I just wish they would do studies, and I know it's really hard to do it with human beings, but I know a lot of dads who do speak to their babies, right? When the mother's carrying the baby, like in the womb. I would love to see what happens to the brain of the baby with a dad who, you know what I mean? Yeah, but no, absolutely. And of course, and again, this is the village of attachment, right? The more people that the baby is surrounded by, that they're attached to, the more they're going to learn from everybody around them.
And like I was actually had the opportunity to participate in this First Nations. It's almost like it's called a welcoming of the baby into the family. So the baby, knows that their family. So they make this circle, and in the circle, the last two people are the parents. So as the baby is introduced to the extended family, everybody gets to hold that baby. And if it starts, if she or he starts to cry, then they still pass the baby. And the parents are sitting there, the last two people, looking at their baby, not crying, not crying anymore, crying, and it's hard to watch your baby be held by somebody else and you want to go there and get them. But this is a teaching, for that community, it was a teaching to say that the child is born unto the family. And it was so beautiful. I was like touched, and
because you're not only engaging the attachment instincts of the baby towards the adults, but gaining the attachment instinct. I know so many times, I mean, my husband said it, and anybody who knows my husband knows he is an incredibly caring person. But before the baby was born, he said, oh, well, I like babies, but I prefer them when they can talk. The minute his daughter was born, he fell in love with her. And so when you're passing the baby around, I imagine people are kind of looking at this precious thing that's in their arm, and they're falling in love with the baby too, right? Yeah. And of course, where does the baby land at the end, right? At the end, the baby lands with the parents. Yeah. But it's
called imprinting.
but it is, and it's imprinting the adults onto the child as well, because we have to fall in love with babies so that we are willing to do all the other things we have to do with them. I mean, some of this is the ceremonies that cultures have developed are so precious and necessary for humans to thrive. Yeah, it sounds like a lovely.
Yeah, that was a beautiful thing. So if anybody has any questions, or pop them in the chat, send me an email. I'll ask for you. And yeah, that's about it.
But we will in the next sessions. We're going to do, next week, we're going to explain a little bit more about all the different aspects of that preschooler's development. There's a lot more to unpack there. And then in future sessions, we're going to start talking about attachment and separation, go into more depth in terms of what Lena was presenting, and then go into some of the other emotions like frustration and alarm and how they're expressed, and then play, the importance of play. So bit by bit, we will kind of build the picture around. And the challenge, of course, for every one of you is to find the little thing that you can do a bit differently the next day. Because I know that many of you have, eight little guys to take care of, 8 little toddlers to take care of. You won't be able to do everything that we talk about. But as I mentioned, it's just one little change can make the child's world feel like a better place.
Indeed, and if you have the handout from this session or continue, there are several places where tracking, choosing a small doable thing that you can do, one little thing, and then tracking whether or not that's going to fit your circumstances, how it works for doing it, and so on, can be an important part of the reflection and the implementation of what you've heard, and kind of putting it on the ground and putting it into practice, because strengthening practice is so important. We've had a lot of intellectual stimulation. We know our hearts are warm towards these young children in our care because of what we know more about who they are and what limitations they have with their immaturity. And now, if we can also strengthen our practice to bring some changes in, it would be wonderful to hear from you about that.
Yes.
I'd also like to mention if people could leave their email in the chat box. So if we have any information or, we need to get in contact with you for whatever reason, if you can leave your email address in the chat box, that would be great.
Yeah, and we'll send them the handout for today, and we'll put it up on our website, and which is not up yet, but really soon. We're working hard on everything, to be honest. We're working really, really hard, so we just cannot do everything at the same time, but trust me, we're trying our best to get everything done and easy for everyone to find. Since we have a few minutes, Eva, I would ask you if it was possible to elaborate a little bit more on separation, because we talk about separation, but if you could go a little bit deeper, separation, if you could go deeper a little bit in separation.
Well, I mean, separation is really about not feeling that the person who's supposed to take care of you isn't able to take care of you. With very, very young babies, of course, it is more a physical kind of a feeling. But with older children, it also not only comes with actually being separated, but thinking about being separated. And again, we're going to talk later on about, and I know that Lena has all sorts of practical things that they have done, but also the child really knowing that we're going to come back, right? Like it's not, because sometimes, I mean, English is the worst language for this. We say goodbye. That sounds so final. In French, it's au revoir, à la prochaine, the next time we see you. I wish we could find a nice, easy, English way of saying that, because what our children want to know is, will you come back? Because it's fear about us not coming back. It's not being apart from us because they can handle that. It's like, but are you going to come back? So I don't know, Lena, if there's something else you want to add to that.
I think that's well put. We call that bridging, right? Is one of the 3 pillars of attachment, with matchmaking and collecting. We call it bridging so that every time there is an interruption, you build a bridge with the child to the next connection. And this can also happen, Valerie, around discipline, or times when you're upset with the child and so on, that we always are trying to build a bridge to the next connection so they do not feel so devastated because they don't know that we can be upset and also still love them. Now, this is also very much an age question, right? Separation for an infant is a completely different thing with, they can't handle it very well at all after a few months of age. So there we have to build a lot of attachment with the caregivers. Yeah. Does that answer what you were thinking, Valerie? Between
Yeah, thank you.
See, that's why we love questions, because it gives us a chance to kind of give another spin on it. So I'm hoping that as time goes on, you will become, just have confidence in yourself that every question is a good question.
That's great. So I guess with that, since there's no more questions, I'd like to thank all the participants for coming. Like I see at least 5 or 6 different communities, including my own. So I'm like, hey, everybody. I miss home. And, I'd like to thank you. Bye, Valerie. I'm saying, hey, gang. Anyway, just like to thank the presenters for doing an awesome job today. Leanna, you have so much useful information for me today. I'm still learning, lifelong learning. I didn't know some of the stuff that you brought up today, and I'm really glad that I got to participate in this, and I'm thankful I'll be included in the next ones. And Eva, like, it's always a pleasure, hearing you speak and voice, your knowledge on early childhood, and it's wonderful just having you. And for Sarah and Valerie, you've been working in this for such a long time, and you've created a really nice project here, and I'm very, very happy you did. So with that, Kajimigwech for coming, everybody, and thank you all for listening and being part of this. Fill out the survey. Tell us what you need. We're going to be all in it together, and we're going to make a change. So with that, I will bid you a good evening, good health and happiness, and lots of love.